Hello and welcome, wonderful humans, to a Sword and Quill tutorial. My name is Zine and we're gonna take a look at Screenreader capabilities in Godot, and we're gonna use a plugin for that. Now note that Godot has native TTS support. You can read up on that in the documentation. However, there is some lag and some input delays with the internal TTS system, which might get tweaked or fixed in the future, but for now the NVDA plugin works much smoother. So in this tutorial we're going to use that plugin. If you don't want to use a plugin, you can still follow the tutorial. You just have to replace any of our functions that are NVDA wrapper.say later in the video with this one here, the native Godot function, and the rest still works. You can still follow the tutorial. NVDA is a free screen reader that you can just download to test yourself. It's currently only supported for Windows and is open source, so it's a nice software to integrate in your Godot project. You can find all information here, and there's also a link in the description. So let's get started. Let's create a new project and name it NVDA test. I usually use compatibility renderer because it works on more machines and I don't need a fancy rendering, but it's up to you what you use for the test. This is absolutely fine. And then we are gonna download the NVDA plugin. So go here and download the zip here. Open it, and what we want from here is the add-ons folder and the NVDA GD extension, and we copy those over. Now you will read here that it says copy add-ons and the extension file as we did, and then it says to edit the script as an autoload. You don't have to do that anymore. That is outdated. Now is a static, so you don't have to put it into your globals autoload. This means you can call this function from anywhere. And the key thing that you want to use is this one, say. So this you can just call from anywhere by saying NVDA wrapper.say. Then you put in the text, which languages and which speed, and then it will check automatically first if the string's empty, and also if NVDA is running. So it uses say NVDA if it is running, and if not, it will default to the system TTS. And then you can also add any things like your own languages and speed via settings, but I might do a different video about that. For now, you just have to know that NVDA wrapper.say is how you can talk via screen reader from your game in Godot. So then let us test this by creating a new scene. Let's take a user interface, call it test menu, and we save it to a new folder called scenes. And here we go. So we can add a script, call it test menu as well, and it should inherit control. Yes, that's all fine. And empty. I like to create my templates, my scripts with an empty template, so there is no functions that I don't need. Then give it a class name, test menu. This is not necessary. but I like to name my scripts. And now we can go into the ready function just so we can test it and say NVDA wrapper say hello world. Okay, and now if we test this, it should, yes, let's select this. Oh, you hear nothing. Now, what's the problem? So by default, text-to-speech is not enabled in your project, so you have to enable it in Godot editor for your specific project. And to do this, you go to project settings, make sure advanced settings is on, and go to audio and general. So let's do this. Project settings, advanced setting is on. And then we find audio. Oh, advanced settings is on. We go to audio, general, text to speech. Turn that on, and you have to save and restart the project. Let's do that. And now we're back, and it should work this time.
Hello world.
There we go. And it now uses the system TTS because NVDA is not running. So now if we start NVDA,
Taskbar.
Now we have NVDA running. We can see it here.
NVDA. Test menu.tscn. NVDA test. Debug. Hello world.
We see that it is running.
Exit. NV.
Now this is nice and good, but we want some use cases, right? We want like have a menu and have the screen reader read out the buttons. So let's create a simple button menu. Center it and put in a button. Let's give it some minimum size, something nice and big. Mind you that this example, what we're creating, is an example for a game that is running both for sighted and blind players, because otherwise you don't necessarily need a button, because you just read out the states that you are on. So let's say we have a new game, a continue and an exit. If this game is just for blind players or only for blind players, then we don't need buttons. This is meant for having a TTS mode for sighted players and visually impaired players. That's why we also add buttons here. So let's call this new. Nope, that's a tooltip. Up, there we go. A new game. That's a bit big, isn't it? Let's say 50. Then continue and exit. Now, by default, these buttons are for pressing with the mouse. You can assume that 99% of cases blind players will use keyboard or gamepad, and the handy thing with Godot is that it handles keyboard inputs for UI already. The only thing we have to do is first name our buttons. Button new game. button continue, button exit. Give them all unique names. I'll reference them here. Or for now, yeah, reference them here. And then, yes, all we need to do is, it's called focus. Focus is which button or which UI element, or generally which control element currently has the input attention, basically. So if you hit confirm, that button or whatever control is currently having the focus is being activated or used. So we have to declare something that has focus, and then the rest works by itself. So we just start with the button new game, and all we have to do is grab focus. This will tell Godot that this button should have focus when we start the game. So now if we start the game,
Hello world.
you can now see a new game is highlighted, and if I press down on the keyboard, it selects what's under it or up. Now, you note that it does not read what we are selecting, so that is not very helpful. So for that, we are going to create our own little component, which I call the TTS component. And for that, we create a new node, because it does not need to exist as a UI element. Call it the TTS call it the TTS component. And we give it a script. It's also called a TTS component. Oh, and here we did not create an empty script. That is fine. And now what we want to do. So this component is going to handle reading out all the UI elements that we are highlighting on. And for that, we also want to create, first a folder we call scripts, plural, more than one. And we create a script which is basically a resource class, or actually a resource. And we call this TTS data. And this inherits a resource. And now we have, give it a name, class name TTS data, and what we want from it, two exports variables that we can adjust from the editor. The first one is target, which is a control. So which element, right, resources cannot have export references to controls. So what we want to do is instead a path. We want a node path as a target, and the second one is the description, which is a string. Now we can create resources in the TTS component, which first has an array. So we have an exported array, and we call this TTS nodes, and it's going to be an array of type TTS data. And then we need a function that, so the TTS component will be fed a bunch of control nodes and a description with those nodes. So the TTS controller then will take notice of each of these nodes when they get focus, because getting focus is a signal in Godot that you can subscribe to. So we want a function that says on node focused. Put a pass on here for now. We just need it to exist. And then on the ready function, we will go through all nodes that we assigned in the array up there. So we say for data, TTS data in TTS nodes, we iterate through and we connect the signal focus entered to our own nodes on node focused. So we have to, since this, right, this stores a node path and not the node, we have to get the node first from the path. So we say get node, then data, which is our resources, and it has the parameter target. So get node, focus entered. Now you will see that there is no autocomplete for that. That's because Godot doesn't know what type of node we're getting here. So if you want autocomplete, we can get around by creating a variable and casting it. We say this node and call it control, which then Godot knows, oh, okay, the node that we loaded here is of type control. So now node focus entered connect. So whenever the system detects that the node specified here gets focus, which means it gets hovered on or gets selected, it fires the signal and we connect this to on node focused. And what we need from here is actually some information, and so we will pass the data object of type TTS data from, so the signal fires and you can send information from a signal connection if we use bind. So when focus entered happens, we connect it to the method on node focus and we bind to it the data, which means when it calls this, since we connect this method to several nodes, in this case 3, each of them fires this method with a different data. So we don't have to have different methods for different things. We can use the same method but bind different parameters to it. So now we know if it gets focused, we call this. So now here we can say NVDA wrapper say, and now we have data, so we can refer to the data and get the description. And now the wrapper will just take care of this. But we haven't connected these yet, so we just have this component. But yeah, let's create a scene out of this. New folder, components. So we can reuse it, because that is the goal, that we can reuse this several times for all the scenes and set this up differently. So now we see we have here, when we have the TTS controller selected, we have now the TTS nodes exposed as an array. So now what we wanted to do is we wanted to create 3 entries, and they are of type TTS data. So now we can create new resource for each of them. So the fact that we create our own resource and not just have an array of controls is that we cannot combine the information of this is a node and that description should be read for it. So we are combining information here into one unit. So we want to tell the TTS component that there's a control node that is paired with this description. So we have new game, we drag it on here, and we say new game. And the same goes for, oops, closed it. Same goes for this, call it continue. And this one is exit. So now when we run this,
Hello world. Continue. Exit. Continue. New game.
you can hear that it reads out as soon as the button gets focused.
Continue.
It reads what we assigned here. So the nice thing is this works with translation too. So if you use translation, for example, a spreadsheet or something, you can also put translation context here. It will then read whatever language it pulls from. So now though, we have one issue. I don't know if you noticed, but check out what happens.
Hello world.
As we say, the scene starts with the words hello world, and the TTS component only reads when focus is entered.
Continue.
So a new game does not get read at the beginning, which means we have a hello world and then the user doesn't really know what to expect. So for that, we want to implement some sort of introduction. So export var introduction, which is a string, or we can call it a multi-line. We want to type more into it, and a variable, var introduction played bool. So what these two things take care is we can define an introduction and control what has been read. So instead of ready, no, we still keep ready, so it still should connect all the nodes, but we want another function which we call start. And then we check if introduction is empty, we return because there's nothing to read. Otherwise, NVDA wrapper will read the introduction text. Say introduction, and then we have to make sure that introduction late is set to true. Now, why do we need to set a variable for that? It's because we want to make sure that, because if we start this scene, it also focuses the new game button, right? So depending on which frame comes first, sometimes they compete for attention. So the introduction wants to be read, but also the button gets focused and wants to be read. So we only want to say the on-node focus things when, so if not introduction done or introduction played, we return. So we want to only have these read once the introduction is done. And here we can say, so if there is no introduction introduction played, then we can also set it to true because there is no introduction. And then at the end we say start. Now what do we put into the introduction? We can say main menu currently selected, start game. So with this then,
Hello world.
yes, we still have this done.
New game. Continue. New game.
Okay, it does read it. So yeah, I found the issue. This will often happen, that because you automatically read with the NVDA wrapper, something that happens when focused, that it competes with things that you want to say manually. So in this case, saying the introduction and setting it to true, and the focus firing this method happens so shortly together that we say the introduction, it gets set to true, it gets focused in the same frame, so this fires because this is already set true. To avoid that, if we know that there's a variable or a thing called after we say something with the NVDA wrapper, that we await one process frame so the things don't happen simultaneously. Also, we call this new game, not start game, so now it works as intended.
Main menu. Currently selected. New game. Continue. Exit. Continue. New game.
There we go. So now we have a nice introduction. This, you can use this for any type of screen. So let's say we have a setting screen here too. You press on setting, you have an introduction that says setting screen, and what you're currently focused on, because as said, the TTS reader will not read the first item that you have selected, only once you start changing. And with that introduction, you can explain things what are on the screen. Like you could also say how many items there are to select, all sorts of summaries, and then the information when you press the buttons, or like control hints. For example, if something is suddenly layouted horizontally when everything else was vertically, and then you get a screen where you have something like cards in a row, then you can say in the introduction Lewis screen, press left and right, for example, to select your cards. Yeah, but now we see this is very manual, right? Which is nice for menus when we know how many buttons there are, or you could be like scene, but like I dynamically load all my item lists in the game at runtime. I cannot just drag them all in because I don't know how many the player has. So if we want dynamic things, we can also, what I have done is using these for manual menus, and then having a second array which does not have to be exported because this is done via runtime. We call this TTS runtime nodes, which is also an array with TTS data, but as opposed to this one, this gets filled during runtime. This is helpful for, as I said, for example, you open an inventory and the inventory dynamically loads all the items that you have, or any long lists, anything that is never the same, or where the numbers change. So for this, we need a function that I call add TTS node, which is also data TTS data. So we could pass here data from the other script, but we also kind of don't want the other scripts to have to deal with these creating the TTS data. So we'll just take care of it in the TTS controller, and what we then want when we add this is a target, which can be a control, and a description, which is just a string. So what we now just do is we create new data is TTS data.new. So we create a new resource called new data, and then new data target is gonna be the target, and let's remember that the target is a path and not an object, not a node. We use get path to get the path and store it in here, and then new data description here. And then we have the data, and the data will be lost if we don't reference it at somewhere. So we also have to append it to our new array that is just for the runtime nodes. TTS runtime nodes append our new data. And now what else do we have to do? The same thing that we do up here is actually connecting the focus signal, which is the target focus enter, and we have new data here. Okay, so we pass over this target, and if the target gets focused, we call the same function as before, focus nodes, and bind the new data. Now one more thing we have to do to be safe, that when those things are loaded dynamically, we are currently not checking if the node already is connected. So we want to only do this when the node does not yet exist in our runtime nodes array. So we do another function, and we call this find or has node, and a target control, which will return a bool. And then we check var new variable, and we say has node start off at false, and then we go, since we do not store the nodes in our array, we cannot just check if the array has the node we're looking at. Since it has paths, we have to iterate through our array manually and check if the node paths are for a node that we are currently trying to add. So for data TTS data in runtime, TTS runtime nodes, we say if get node data target equals the target control, then has node is true, and we can break the loop. Break means otherwise it will go through all the elements until the end, but if we already have found the node, we don't have to do that, so we can just break the loop here. And we set the has node to true, and at the end we return as node. So if it goes through the entire array and doesn't find it, then the has node remains unchanged, which is false, and it will return false. So add TTS node, so we can check now if has node target return. Has node. Oh. I guess Godot has node script. So maybe we rename it just to be safe. We don't confuse ourselves. Has TTS node. Here we go. Just to be safe and not confuse ourselves with already existing functions. And now we add this only if the array doesn't have that node yet already. So to make a good example for it where it makes sense is, for example, now we create a new button. We call it button inventory. Inventory doesn't make sense in the main menu, but just as an example. And now let's not forget we have to add another TTS data because we added a new button. So if you like to do this manually, because it's visual and you can do it in the editor, you can use it like this. I usually create these all. For example, I would assign these in my script, but I leave you both options for whatever you prefer. And we put the inventory button here and call it inventory. See, now if I run this, it will already
Main menu, inventory, continue,
read this.
inventory.
So it's a very easy addition to change a menu and already have TTS support. So now we want to create a new scene, which is the inventory. Call this the inventory screen. There we add it, and this will basically just be a vertical box container that holds all the items. And for that we create now, just to make it as an example, create a new resource base, which we call item. Inherits a resource, so we can create our own items as an example and call it class name item, which has export var title and export var description. It's called multi-line description string. To do this up here too, and just so we have a example for more dynamic information, let's add a cost variable. So we have an item title, a description, and a cost. And now let's just create some items. Resources. Items. Put it in resources. And now let's create a new resource of type item right here. And let's say potion, just random examples. Call it potion heals 25 HP and costs 10. Then duplicate it, call it sword. sword, 5 attack, and cost 20, and a third item that we call shield. Doesn't really matter. Shield. 10 defense and costs also 22, just so we have differences. And now on our inventory screen, we can do a script called inventory screen. And now, usually you would store your inventory probably on a different script, like the inventory itself and not the inventory screen. But for now, we just pretend, or let's say collected items, we pretend that we have this, we get this information from something here. So we have an array of collected items that we could say, like we pretend that the player collect these during their runtime, and we add those here. So we have the potion, shield, and sword. And now on ready, we fill our inventory screen. And for that, we need a reference to our VBox container. There we go. So now for item in collected items, we create a new label. Var label. Nope. Oh yeah, sorry. Label is a label no. So we spawn a new label, put it in the VBox container as a child, because remember, if there's no reference for it and if it's not part of the scene tree, it will immediately vanish again. So we add the label, and the label text should be the item title. So if we now play this scene, so now we have those 3 items, but as said, we cannot select them with the keyboard because we haven't grabbed any focus yet. And buttons start with focus mode enabled, but labels do not. So they can technically have focus, but they're currently by default are off. So we also have to take care of that when we create the labels. So we can say label focus mode is control focus all. And then once we are done with all the items, we can take the VBox container, get the first child. So it takes the index, so 0 is the first child, and just grab focus there. So now we should be able to. Okay, it doesn't really show. So we can also instead just go and use a button, which is just easier to handle anyway. And we want to press a button when we use the item anyway, so we do not need this. And call it button. button. And now this should, nope, we want the scene. This should work. There we go. Although it does not seem to, oh, we are not having inputs. There we go. Now we can select them, but we hear nothing. All right. Because we do not have the TTS controller set up. So what we want to add is the TTS component here. And now this time we do not drag them in here manually. We do this through the inventory script, but we do want to have an introduction, which we then call, we say inventory screen. Actually, we want to have dynamic text here too. We want to tell the player how many items are available when they enter the screen. So when we are ready here, we want to have a reference to our TTS component here. And then we say TTS component. We can also set this via script and say introduction. Oh. TTS component. Wait. Could have a class name here. Class name TTS component. Because we want that sweet autocorrect, right? TTS component. Then we can say introduction is, now we can load things dynamically here by saying inventory screen. Also be careful with dots, because NVDA and other screen readers often read them out. Especially if you have several sentences string together, and sometimes you could have accidentally have two dots, two periods. So I usually prefer a comma, which prompts them to make a slight pause to read, but do not read the symbol. So inventory screen, available items is, then we have a placeholder, and the placeholder we now can load with selected items size. So now this will read dynamically how many items we have when we enter the screen. And also we want to always tell the player what they are currently focused on, so we can say currently focused or selected. Another placeholder, which we then have to turn into an array. So first placeholder is the amount. The second is then, as we grab here the first child, we can do that again and read the title, because we know it's an item. And then TTS component start, right? So we set the introduction and then we start. But we also need to add the TTS nodes to the TTS component. Otherwise it will not know that it has to check for them to get focus, and then second to read a description. So here we make a new string. We call this TTS item description, which also uses placeholders because we load those dynamically. But what I like to do is use context placeholders, which are done with those curly brackets. So there's two things. And things you have to consider when designing for screen readers and blend players is when to read what kind of information. Because we want the players to know what item they have, how many, what the description is, what they do, what they cost, right? But it can be annoying, slow, and overwhelming if you do it for every item that you focus on. So what I like to do is usually just read the name of the item or the thing that you just focused on and have a universal details button that then reads all the details when you press it. So what we do then is we just add, for now, the item title for when we hover or when we focus on it, and have a different function later for getting the details. So we take the TTS component, add a TTS node. The target is the button, not the item. The button is that what gets focused on and what we want to read out. So, right, we have the function here, which first takes the control, this is the target, and then what it should read once it's focused. So we also take the item title here, just like here. It reads for every item, it will add this component, this node, as a TTS data. So now
sword.
Title on base button. See, we confused. And we can just take the text of the button, because we are not getting a item here, we're getting a button. But since we put the item title in the button text, we can also read that out.
Sword.
Nope. Start. See, we confused something. Let's see. We don't have to call start because we already... yes. So sometimes, so if we fill the introduction, currently we call the start during our ready function, right? Which is fine. But so let's make this not private, because we want to sometimes do this manually. Or in this case, it's fine because we put the introduction, for the main menu, it's fine because we put the introduction text in manually. But if we want to do this via code, we want to decide ourselves when we call start. So let's add another variable here and call this start automatically bool, and then we can say, let's say it's true by default. Let's give it var here, and then only call this if start automatically is true. Then play it yourself. Otherwise we call it ourselves. Oh, but then we have to also do it in our main menu then. Yeah. Go. Inventory screen. Let's go.
Inventory screen.
Yeah.
Available items. 3. Currently selected. Sword. Shield. Potion. Shield. Sword. Shield. Potion.
Okay. Now what we are doing is we are reading now the name, but another thing we want to do is now reading details when we press a detail button. So for that we want to add another field to our TTS data and call this var detail description. All right. And then in our TTS component, we want to have a function then func read details for a target control, and then if not has a TTS node target return, and then we can have a different function to actually get the node, because again, remember we have path, node path stored, not the actual node. So we can have a second function which we call find TTS node, which works similar, but instead of a bool, it returns a TTS data. So it works similar to this. Actually copy this and say if we get, we don't need this, we just return here then the data, and if it can't find it, we return null. So then we don't have to do this. We can say var target data is find TTS node target, and say if, oh no, we don't have to actually assign a variable. We can just say if find data node is not null, then NVDA wrapper say no. We do have to do that because we want to store the data. If target data is not null, then NVDA wrapper say target data detailed description. And then we go back to our inventory script, because now we actually have to assign it var detailed description. And now we do what I wanted to say earlier, is the context placeholders, which we say is item name, description, item description, and then number, nope, cost. And now how we can use the format method to fill these dynamically. Format. So we make a dictionary declaration and fill these item name, then is item.title, item description is item description, and X is item cost. So, and now another thing is, so we add the detailed descriptions now to our new field, and all the add TTS node, we want to also have an optional parameter here is detailed description. So if we assign this like this, it means it's optional. So if we call this method without defining the detailed description, it will default to empty. So we say new data detailed description is detailed description. So when we go back to our inventory, we have to put the add TTS node below the variable where we declare this, and then we can assign this as our third optional parameter. So if we hover over it, you can see it here, targets. First one is the control, second one is the description, and the third one now is the detailed description. So, but now the TTS controller does not know when to read the details. So we need to actually check for an input to call this. Two things. We need an input to call this, but we also need to keep track what is currently focused on, because when the player hits the detail button, this script, the inventory screen, doesn't necessarily know what is currently focused on. So we create another variable which called focused item, which is of type button, because that's what we are focusing on. No, actually we want to focus on an item. We are focusing the button, but we want to store which item is currently focused on, and then we want a function that says func on button focused, and it takes an item though. So item, and then we say focused item, we set it to the item that gets handed over. And now again the bind function comes in super handy, because now we can say, so again in the ready function we go through all our collected items, we create a button for it. So while we are creating the button for it, we know which item it is for, even though it's not stored anywhere in the button. But now we can say, we can connect to the button focus entered function signal, and then connect that to the on button focused. And also, just a reminder, so Godot will autocomplete this as a method, which does not work because we are not calling the function here, we are creating connection to this method. So do not include these parentheses, and we bind now the item. So this connection to this button will now always transfer the correct item to this method. And now we always know what item we're currently focused on. So now we can call a input event. Here, take the native one. And we need to actually create an input event for that, an input action. So we go to project settings, input map, and we create a new action that we can call TTS details. And now you can add this action. Let's copy it so we have the correct name. And this action now we can assign buttons to. So for my games, I use tab, but you can use anything you want. You can use D for details. You can also add a second one. If you have a controller, you can now add a second one. Like we can also have two. Like if you want D and tab to work, or like a mouse button. But for me, for now, tab is just fine. So now we check here in our inventory screen if event is action pressed. And then we already have it here, TTS details. Then we tell the NVDA, the TTS controller component, there we go, names, read details for right. Now we mix something up because the read details actually takes the control, because the TTS component already knows which information is connected to which target, so we did like a double thinker here. So this actually has to be a button on focus, on button focus, so we call this focused button. Focused button, button. Let's change it all here, and we don't bind the item, we bind the button. See, I forgot that our TTS controller already takes care of connecting which button has which item stored. So now we call this with a focused button. And this should read the details when we hover over it. Let's hope it works.
Inventory screen, available items, 3, currently selected, sword, shield, potion, shield.
Okay, and now I press tab.
Potion. Shield. Potion.
Tab is already used for selecting the next item in the list. So that's already, you can also filter, like if you show built-in actions here, you can filter by event. So if I go in here and press tab, then you find all the actions. Hit use tab, so you see UI focus next. It's already used by this. So I could either remove this if I don't want it, or I'll just change it. Oop. Change it to D for details. That's fine too. Nope. This one. Oh, right. Okay. Let's try this again.
Inventory screen, shield, potion, shield, shield, description, 10 defense, cost, 22.
There we go.
Shield, sword.
So now if we want just to browse our items, we can do so by going through it. And if we want details, press D.
Shield, description, sword, sword, description, 5 attack, cost, 20.
There we go. And now what we might want to add to the introduction is the info. Oops, here we go. Where do we have the instruction? Here we go. Inventory screen, available items, currently selected this, and then press D for details. So they actually know how to get to the details when they play.
Inventory screen, available items, 3, currently selected, sword, press D for details.
There we go. And that works now. So if you, during your runtime, get any more items, let's say the inventory adds more items, and you open the inventory screen, it will then add all the new items and read them, add the description dynamically. Now you might want to update this description. Let's say you have several, like 10 potions, and you say in the details also, or generally when you hover over how many you have, and you use one potion and it's now one less, then you want to update this description. So you might want to have another method to update the description, we could do this in the TTS controller and say func update details target control, and then we just copy this over and say if target data is not null, then target data. So we need actually no description. Target data detail description. Set it to the new description. And now we can update it for whenever it changes any details during our visit of that screen. So yeah, that's basically the root of it. There are little tricks that you can do, like in the settings, for example. So one thing that I added to the wrapper myself, which is always handy for Screenreader games, is having a way to repeat the last message, because sometimes you might have missed it or have taken a break or you don't know where you are. So what I do is here I add a variable store last message, also has to be static, and we call it last message, and it is a string. And then whenever we say something here and it checks that the string is not empty, we can fill the last message with the text string that gets passed here. And then we want another input action, which we call TTS repeat. And usually on keyboard it's R for repeat, but you can put in whatever you feel fits. We cannot call an input function in a static script, so we have to do it somewhere else. So we could have a global script, which you will probably have at some point anyway. It is like a game manager or something. The game manager and empty, which you then add to this one. We add to global, so it's always ready. No, not scenes, scripts, game manager. And then we can say input event and say if event is action pressed, TTS repeat. Then we say NVDA wrapper repeat last message, I think. Make an instance. Oh, yes. Because we also have to mark this as a static. Static func repeat last message, and now it should work.
Main menu. Currently selected, new game.
So now if I press R,
Main menu.
it repeats it.
Currently inventory. 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 Continue.
So that's very helpful, especially if you have like longer details. For example, in Soul Blaze, you have combat, and then it reads a lot of things that just happened, and you might have missed something, and you can press R to hear it again. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. I'll upload this project to GitLab, and you can check it out, download it, and see for yourself. And yeah, I hope this helped you. and consider making your games more accessible to people. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can find me on Blue Sky. All the links are below in the description, also the link to the plugin. And yeah, shoot me a question, or let me know how I can improve this. And yeah, I hope you liked it, and see you in the next tutorial. Bye.